Okay, thanks. So, yeah, the first slide is that firstly, I'm really grateful to you, Andrew, and to the War Resisters International. For years, I've been part of peace movements and writing on those issues, and I've been pleading that we need to really, have a deeper intersection with the climate activists and the climate movement. And finally, I can see that actually coming together. Okay, so next slide. Can you change the slide? Okay, so now, of course, I'm going to talk about India and South Asia. And while India has these, big targets and there's significant advances in solar and renewables, there is actually very little attempt, or at least there's a blocking of how to relate defense and ecological costs. So there's no public discourse, especially the mainstream media or anywhere, which does talk of climate change, but they never link it with militarization, or in fact, all of South Asia, or with the defense industry and the rising kind of militarization in our region. Now, of course, undoubtedly, all defense and security departments in all countries are huge consumers of fossil fuels, and India has the third largest military and a huge number of active defense personnel. And if, for example, the US has 12% of CHG emissions, we mustn't forget that a country like India has almost 6.8, which is extremely high. And then Pakistan also follows. But there's much more to what is happening in militarization. We can get to the next slide. And in India. Now, one of the worst possible thing is that between India and Pakistan or South Asia, they have the highest militarized zone in the world. That is because India and Pakistani militaries are facing off in the Himalayas. The Indian Army operates at the highest point at the Siachen Glacier, 20,000 feet above the sea, above sea level. And the Pakistani army is very close to some points. So there you have both these armies in these very, very ecologically sensitive mountains. And this glacial meltdown that flows into the rivers of the Indus and the 5 rivers of the Indus. This is a lifeline of millions in the subcontinent. But the reason there is very little conversation is because this is part of both countries' nationalism and national security. The next slide, please. So since 1984, where they have this, while there is a ceasefire, for both these countries, the costs are $200 to $300 million every year. And sometimes, for India, for example, now they're calculating it to $60 million a day to maintain this huge amount of military in the mountain. And this militarization of these mountains is contributing for up to 50% of climate change effect in the Himalayas, which can, of course, be decreased, but it is not. Next slide. So the issue is, some very strange things. For example, there is no means over here from these glaciers to even bring back waste from where the troops are deployed. There's a mountain of trash which is gathering here almost at the size of these peaks, because there's 2,000 pounds of waste a day dumped into the glacier crevices each day, along with heavy artillery wastes. So there's serious water pollution for the downstream communities, for the species and vegetation. And the distance from the glacier to the base camp takes 4 days of climbing. So more soldiers are actually dying of frostbite than of war. But there is no attempt to even have a conversation between these two countries about the both demilitarization or climate in this region. The reason is, and I think many of you in states like ours, national security states, where the army is so militarized. You can go down to the next slide. The whole issue is more about national security. So you cannot really have a conversation. And the peace groups and the climate groups, they can speak of other things, but they cannot touch national security issues, which are linked to between India and Pakistan or India and China, and these issues. The other thing is nuclear power. Now, nuclear energy is being seen as cheap and clean, but we know it has caused catastrophic accidents and contaminated millions of square miles and poisoned thousands. Now, in India, the elite is treating it as the technology of the future, as an icon of modernity, as a precondition for progress and success. And we have these Kudankulam nuclear power plants in South India, and there was a huge local popular movement to protest against it. And in this, like the Philippines, we heard earlier, everyone in the movement, and that was 120,000 people, were charged with sedition and charged with the attempt to murder. And people who disappeared or who are now, very poor people who have to engage lawyers to get rid of the charge of being murderers because they were activists. They can no longer be activists because all the time they're fighting these cases. And the Indian judiciary is extremely slow. Then, because of this national security issue where we cannot really talk about these things, there is a military adaptation, means the military is seen as one non-corrupt force, unlike the police or the bureaucracy. So wherever there is a crisis in all of South Asia, it is a military which is used. So, for example, last year there was these huge floods in Pakistan, and it was only the military that could and was used to deliver aid, tents, etc. And these very indebted governments, therefore, are centering the military even more on because of national security, giving them more functions and more work to do in civil spaces, so that people are more grateful to the military. When you're in a flood and you're almost, or in an earthquake or tsunami, it's a military which is rescuing you. So then you're not being able to critique the military when you know you need this demilitarization. So Sri Lanka, for example, they even handed over their national playgrounds and stadium to the military because they had a debt crisis, instead of actually subsidizing the stadia or making it a community venture. So really, all these things are very linked. Next, I just want to relate it to the next slide, to global militarization, where we know that the US military industrial complexes pollutes more than any country. And there's this remarkable report from the Transnational Institute, which shows that the richest nations are spending 30 times as much on military as they are on climate finances. And there's no evidence that the military can reduce emissions or decrease its footprint. And instead of providing climate finance, these richest countries are selling arms. And so, of course, the military could have paid for the global Green New Deal. But this is what the reason I brought it up is because now, with this new kind of Cold War and the theater of war being shifted to the Indo-Pacific, there is pressure on already, these countries like India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, all in South Asia, to become US allies to contain China. And so even further militarize our borders. And it's not that our regimes are innocent. Many of them would like to be part of the US as US allies because they know that then they can easily, then they get excused for human rights violations. And you can see that the difference between, let's say, what's happening in Jordan or Lebanon today, or Palestine and Israel. So these countries do want to, there's pressure on them to join in with the containment of China, have more military agreements with the US and imperialism, and so on. And I think my last point is that this militarization and climate and gender and the feminist movement needs to be so interconnected because this militarization is seeping deep into our societies. I just had this poster to show you the example that when there was this Osama bin Laden and both India and Pakistan said we want to keep out of this 9/11 thing, there were these posters which showed the leadership of both countries as women. That, oh, they don't have the guts, and Osama is this great guy and he's able to use force. And there was also an India-Pakistan standoff at that time. And I interviewed some of the army people who came, and they said, there's all this nationalism around us, but we cannot even drink water from the Siachen Glacier because it's full of cordite. It's poisoned. So that is really the condition. And while these countries have been forced to have targets because of the global global climate change meetings, India does have significant advances in solar and renewable, yet coal remains a major, and its clean energy is only 22% of the mix. And the other thing is India lacks, and all of South Asia lacks, a Green Party. Not that the Green Party today, I spoke to some of them and they're all supporting war, many of them. Look at Annalena Baerbock. So really, this sustainability discourse is not connected with the average citizen. While poverty and national security are on the agenda, of course, getting rid of poverty is very important, but the method which is being proposed is increase the GDP, increase, the kind of path of development that the West has taken, catch up with the West. So really, relating climate and militarization needs to be part of the COP and global civil society agendas and more of a conversation. Only then I think they will become more national or local, or at least the activists will have a bit of a cover, because right now you talk about it and you can be arrested. Thank you very much.